Russia has amassed about 100,000 troops, along its border with Ukraine. And obviously, if they wanted to invade, they could have invaded. So they have all through maintained that they are not going to be invading Ukraine. So the question is that then why are they amassing those troops, right? So we have to then understand that whatever is happening in Ukraine right now is not the Ukrainian crisis per se, but it is the larger part of that iceberg is when you look beneath the surface, which is that basically it is a long-standing Russian demand against NATO's eastward expansion on the one hand, and B, now what it is leading to is that it is leading to a massive European security crisis. Okay, so there are two things. One, I said, is that what really would US and Russia are planning to do about how much NATO should expand and not expand, right? And the flashpoint, Ukraine has become a flashpoint there. But the second thing is, and a more interesting thing is that how Europe is sort of responding to it, because it has actually become a European security crisis. Because whatever these two major powers are doing is actually being felt and seen right in the area on the region of Europe. Okay, so we are seeing a lot of interesting responses coming from a lot of European powers. Okay, and then we also see a lot of division and a lot of differences in how the different European powers, particularly Germany, France, UK, etc., Poland, are responding to this. So this is one part of the story. The second thing that you asked me is that will US or NATO help Ukraine or come to Ukraine's rescue? The short and sweet answer is no. US has already maintained officially that in case of a likely invasion or whatever, since Ukraine is not a part of NATO, therefore the NATO collective security umbrella is not extended to Ukraine, and NATO is not really going to help Ukraine in that kind of a scenario, okay, in any way. Having said that, since, like I said, that Ukraine is merely a flashpoint, and the real problem is about this ego tussle between these one superpower and one earlier superpower, or Soviet Union times. So what we are actually interested in seeing as to who's going to buckle first and who's going to give in to the other side's demand first. So we all know that US and Moscow has been making certain demands from the US about getting guarantees against eastward expansion, NATO's eastward expansion, and US has been responding to those responses. Some papers were leaked by a Spanish news house, and in those papers there was nothing really very different from what was already known so far, but obviously it did accentuate and it did provide the necessary details. Okay, and we saw that there were a few things that the US had said, and now we stand in a very interesting situation, because US has made certain demands that Moscow will never relent to, and Moscow has made certain demands that US would never relent to. Okay, at least as far as the important ones are concerned. What are the most important ones? The most important one is that Moscow wants guarantees against NATO's eastward expansion, and especially that Ukraine will never ever in future will become a part of NATO. Now obviously this is something that the US would never guarantee, because also if you look at the question of Ukraine wants to become a part of NATO. Ukraine is very worried about their security, and particularly after what happened in Crimea in 2014. So Ukraine does want to become a part of NATO, but America doesn't want that, because it would be too direct a confrontation, right, to risk. Okay, but having said that, NATO would never guarantee that Ukraine would never ever become a part of NATO. And then there are other things as well, that US wants Moscow to sort of retreat their deployments, their troop deployments from Romania, from Moldova, etc. And Moscow, and a lot of those deployments Moscow doesn't even agree to. Okay, so those are certain flashpoints which will which don't really have a solution. Okay, then there are other things as well. We learned from the papers that were leaked that US also wants Russia to actually inform beforehand whenever they're doing an ASAT test. test. Okay, now that this is interesting. ASAT is the anti-satellite test which happens in space. Okay, so what we are seeing is that that both sides are making these demands to each other, which none of the sides is going to actually relent to. So this tension is going to continue. Now another interesting question that comes up is that why is Putin doing it now? Okay, so again we have to understand that Putin is doing it now because on the one hand it is from the Russian side, they say that this is long overdue, and B, they think that they can do it now because they really think that they can get away doing it now, because Biden has come up as a weak president, and from the perspective of Moscow, it is like if they don't do it now, they will never be able to do it again, or this is the best time to do it. Because of course we saw how the American supremacy or American hegemony, it suffered after their retreat from Afghanistan, etc. So that is also one point, and the other point that makes Putin a little bit so to say emboldened is also the way both Russia and China keep piggybacking each other on several issues the world over, and especially when it comes to putting forth a united front against US and its allies. So that's another thing. So as far as so like I said, now what is interesting, like I told you that there's something very interesting happening in Europe, is that Europe is also coming up with different security arrangements. So one of the things which is happening in Europe is two things. Okay, in Europe, the one thing that is happening is that the various countries that are involved are really trying the diplomatic hand, the negotiation, the strategic dialogue, etc. Like for instance, a few days ago there were talks under the Normandy format. Normandy format is a format where France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia come together and talk. So it's something very interesting because Ukraine and Russia are not really coming together in any other platform. Apart from that, all these major European leaders like Macron, like Olaf Scholz, okay, they have been trying to go and meet and talk to Putin, okay, and trying to diffuse the tensions, etc. And very interestingly, what is also happening is that a new kind of a security arrangement, regional security arrangements are also coming in place. Like, for instance, I think only yesterday, UK, Poland and Ukraine announced a regional security arrangement, to deter the Russian threat. Now, so these are very interesting things, and of course, Europe is at the center of all this drama. So whatever happens, between these two powers, or whatever is the stance of any of either of the two powers, is going to have a direct implication on the security of Europe, and that is why European powers are very worried about it, right? So those interesting things are happening. As far as India is concerned, well, yes, India's stance so far has been to not say anything. We saw in the Ukrainian crisis, in the United Nations Security Council, India abstained, right? Russia and China vetoed, but India abstained, okay, as usual, and we were expecting that to happen. See, it's something which is very very understandable. India does not want to jeopardize its relationship, its very close relationship with Russia. We have a long-standing friendship and all that, so we do not want to disturb it, because obviously we live in a world order where all the world powers, all the countries, they have realized that they have to fend for themselves, okay? So keeping international interests in mind, it is best to sort of just abstain and try not to get too much involved in it. Now the other interesting bit is whether India can do it for a very long time. I'm afraid not. Okay, if this really continues, and if this really continues to escalate, okay, so far there has not been escalation, but if it continues to escalate, then definitely India will be forced to take some stand. And we saw the beginning of it. How? Because yesterday, or I think today in the morning, we saw our Ministry of External Affairs actually give the first official statement and request all sides to exercise restraint, and also to try and find out a solution through negotiation and dialogue. So this is what India's stand is. Now, to the question as to why is Russia fearing eastward expansion of NATO, is because that right now the security situation in Europe and the eastern side of Europe and in Scandinavian countries is such that, you know, most of those countries out there that are not part of NATO are worried about their securities at the hand of Russians. Okay, now why, like I said, why doesn't Russia want this guarantee? Because Russia can totally see the kind of the kind of unease that it is seeing in countries like Finland, in countries like Sweden, okay, in countries like Ukraine, okay, that are all worried about their security. Sweden, and by the way, look at, for example, let us look at the Scandinavian countries: Sweden, Denmark, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. Out of these three, okay, all of these three countries have an island each in the Baltic Sea. And on the other side of the Baltic Sea, we have Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is the headquarters of Russia's Baltic Fleet. Okay. Now, ever since Russia started to deploy its troops along the Ukrainian side of its border and try to signal and really threaten Ukraine about a possible invasion, what these countries are doing is that, and especially two, Sweden and Finland, they have been trying to rearm their two islands that are there in the Baltic Sea, that are hardly about 300-200 kilometers away from Kaliningrad. Okay. Now, Denmark doesn't really need to worry so much, just because Denmark is a member of NATO, but Sweden and Finland are not. Okay, so that is why there is so much fear in Europe about a possible expansion of NATO, and Russia wants a guarantee against it. But the dichotomy is that Russia needs to really show to these European countries, before it shows to the West, that it does not mean to invade. Okay, the more Russia threatens these countries with respect to their security concerns, the more Russia is pushing them in the lap of NATO. Okay, so that is where the dichotomy actually rests, and that is why I said that basically this Ukrainian crisis flashpoint is unfolding into a massive European security crisis, okay, where we see all these responses coming out. So that is the entire part of the story.